My name is Andrew McGowan. I'm a musician and athlete who geeks out on fashion, art, and great food. I've spent time working with elite performers, repairing instruments for major symphony musicians, training for marathons, and designing wardrobes from everyone from freshman college students to big city lawyers. Trequartista is the Italian word for playmaker and is used to describe a particularly creative role on the soccer pitch, typically behind the central striker. And as the musical trequartista, I aim to kickstart conversations about topics and areas that I think are underrated, underdiscussed, or particularly important to a sustainable, high-octane life. This is the Musical Trequartista, the podcast. Good morning, everybody. I don't know if it's morning when you're at, and it's definitely not morning when this is coming out, but it might be morning when you're listening, so good morning. And it's morning when I'm recording it, and that, I guess, is what counts. Today, we're talking about probably one of the most important philosophies that I currently adhere to, and one that I spend a lot of time talking with my clients and my friends and just in general people that I chat with stuff about, and that's training in volume. So we're going to go over a little bit about what that is, and then I've got a couple of anecdotes and some rationale that we can go through in talking about this. And in case you couldn't tell, and you definitely will by the end of the episode, I have a lot of convictions about this. So the main principle behind training in volume is that if you want to have sustained changes, you need to make those changes habitual. And if you're trying to push the absolute upper limit of that, or like whatever you're trying to work on, and make them a habit at the same time, it's going to be close to impossible. It's much better for you to build habits through like 2/3 to 3/4 of whatever that physical limit is in order for you to sustainably push beyond them. And so one of the things that this looks like is, for example, when I started really getting into more weightlifting things, pull-ups weren't something that were very accessible to me. And so what I did was, after hearing about this kind of training method from a couple of MMA podcasts that I follow, I decided I was going to try some of their training techniques in the gym for myself. And so at the time, I was really only able to do about like one pull-up at a time. And I had to wait about 2 hours before I was rested enough to effectively do a second one like well. And so what that turned into was one at the beginning of my workout, one at the end of my workout, one when I first got up in the morning, and then hopefully one at work, which is 4 a day, as opposed to like having a set time where I was like, oh, this is the set where I do pull-ups during my workout and then do one. When you look at the difference between that, I'm then doing 4 over the course of the day where my body's had time to recover, instead of doing one or attempting to do a good one in the midst of all of the other workout stuff I was doing. And what that allows you to do then over the course of the week, so if I'm doing 6 workouts a week rather than doing 6 pull-ups a week, I'm doing 24, which is way more. way more. And that's assuming that I take at least one day off a week, which I try to, because recovery is really important. And because then you're training frequently, your body responds to that stimulus differently. And let's talk about that for a second. So when you're looking to improve, your brain receives a stimulus whenever you do anything, right? So when your brain is stimulated by an action, an outside force that's acting upon it, it interprets those signals and then has to understand them, break them down. You need to recover from them, and your brain will react to do it better or faster, or in this case, more. And so the idea is you build muscle through that adverse stimuli on your muscles. The muscle fiber breaks down. You rest and eat to recover from that, and then your brain figures out, oh, more of these are going to happen, so let's add more muscle fiber or better muscle fiber in order to make that easier. And so the idea is, well, if you want your body to understand that there's going to be more of this, or we need to operate at this pace, doing it more frequently and making that stimulus more frequent allows your brain to understand, oh, we need to develop this faster. And so you don't actually want to work to complete exhaustion. Otherwise, that recovery time dramatically increases. You want to operate at that 2/3 to 3/4 complete exhaustion time, because what it will allow your body to do is recover at its optimal rate while having that high frequency of stimuli to help your brain understand, oh, this is something that's going to be regular, and so we need to really recover and prioritize this recovery and muscle building and the insulation of our nerve fibers in order to understand that this stimuli is coming so we can execute it easier, better, faster, stronger, whatever. And so that's really the idea behind this idea of training in volume, is breaking it down into smaller pieces and then doing those small things very, very frequently every day or almost every day in order to help form that good sustainable habit. And if you're not going to complete exhaustion all the time, going every day isn't nearly as tough. In fact, it's almost more difficult not to. So for example, like in the pull-up example, if you only have to do 4 pull-ups per day and it's 1 in the morning, 1 at the each end of your workout, and then like 1 on a door frame at work, it's so not that out of your way that it's almost harder not to do it than it is to do it. And this is really a great foundation for getting better at just about anything. I really like it for the fitness thing, but it crosses over into all kinds of stuff too. I'm doing a lot of high register maintenance on my brass playing right now. And so one of the things that I'm finding is applying these principles to that is absolutely perfect, which is really where a lot of this came from. The idea is by pushing these limits, in this case, the limits of my upper register, but it could be like how fast your dexterity is, how well you can effectively play a passage. A lot of musicians are really comfortable with this idea of training in volume. And so like the thing to remember is your brain needs to recover in order to allow those nerve endings to be insulated, to allow that muscle fiber to build back the way it needs to allow your brain to process those stimuli. And so that's why we got to remember that 2/3 to 3/4 physical/mental exhaustion in order to make these habits and make sure things are going to be sustainable in the long term. And so that's where we kind of come to consistency, because training and volume focuses around sustainability. It's important to be as consistent as possible. And so when we're looking to build consistently and make those changes a manageable part of our life, it becomes more difficult not to do them than it is to do them after a sustained, consistent period of growth. So a lot of folks, when they ask me like, Andrew, how are you one of those people that does 10 million things? One of the things I tell them, and that they're always surprised to hear, is I dedicate a little bit of time every day for all of those activities to make them daily practices. And the idea is I make them a part of my life at a threshold that is not excessively demanding on my body or on my mind, in order to make sure I have the will to do them every single day. And some of these activities aren't just like my practicing and my composing and my physical activity, but they include like all of the design stuff I do, all of the fashion stuff I do, listening to music, making sure I have podcast time because learning is still really important to me. The fact that I stretch twice a day, every day, and that I'm meditating daily, and that I sleep a lot, and that my nutrition is optimal. And there's so much going on there that makes this high octane existence I'm trying to pursue actually really accessible. And if you go through that list again, one thing you'll find is a lot of those things are just as much recreational or are recovery or unwinding based as they are career oriented. And that's really, really, really powerful. And when you're having as persistent pursuit of those active recovery sections of your life as you are your active career portions of your life, it's much easier to be relentless in the pursuit of your goals. And those are just some things. That's not including like making sure I regularly see folks in my friend group, spend time with my tribe every single week, that I do things that I enjoy. That doesn't account for the movies that I watch. That doesn't really account for the books that I read. And I try to do some of those every day too. And so the idea is we want to make sure that we're, in this big picture anyway, we're trying to pursue the holistic portion of our life in volume as well as the individual things. But so, for example, if I sat down one day and just said, oh, I'm going to write a piece of music today, and then I work for 6 hours and there's a piece of music done at the end. Yeah, the sprint job is probably pretty good and it's probably a reasonable piece of music, but over a sustained period of time, rather than taking 6 hours in one day to write it, I could take 1 hour over 6 days to write it. And my brain then has time to process all of the choices that I made from the day before and rethink about them. And maybe I completely edit things differently, if I edit things at all. On the 1 day sprint job, I might not make any of the edits that I do, or I might only make some of the edits that I do if I did it 1 hour a day over 6 days. And then in addition, that frees up so much of that day to do other things. For example, if I just write for an hour every morning, I might actually get more work done, because what it's teaching my brain is, this is our writing time. Let's learn to write really efficiently in this writing time. A book I would recommend, if you haven't read it already, is Pound the Stone by Joshua Medcalf. It's not really the sequel, but it's supposed to come after you've read Chop Wood, Carry Water, which is also by Joshua Medcalf, and I recommend them both. But that's kind of the whole point behind it. The allegory of the story is this kid is selling books door to door, and at some point he realizes, oh, if I just focused on like my quantity of sales rather than like just selling as like the biggest sales I can, I'm actually going to make more money. And again, it's train in volume. The idea is build sustained progress. And so if we go back to my pull-ups story from a little bit ago, one of the things I found from that is in just doing 4 every day, it only took me 2 weeks or so to get to the point where I could do easily 2 or 3 at a time. And then at that point, you start increasing exponentially, because what was 4 a day is suddenly becoming 8 to 9 a day. And obviously, like, that's doubling or over doubling the amount that I was doing before. And once you hit that point, you're like increasing way, way more, especially when you start accounting for the week. And most people, if you're doing a lot of pull-ups in your exercises, probably aren't doing more than 20 to 30 pull-ups in a workout. But if you space it out a little bit more and you train in volume, somebody who might do a total of 60 pull-ups a week is doing less than somebody who does 15 pull-ups a day and then would do 90? Yeah. So again, laying it out there. If you're looking for volume, you can actually do more work over the course of the week by doing less. And again, it's not like, oh, we're scaling it back every day. It's that we're making sure things are at a sustainable level of progress. And if you want to have days where you push the limits and you plan extra rest days in that, then go ahead. Like, that can be really important and really empowering. And in our careers, that's something that we're going to have to do. There's going to be days where you have to practice way more or train way more or write way more. And so making sure you have a great foundation, so in that when you get to those points, you're at your most efficient, you're at your most regular, that you associate doing these things with being a joyous part of your life rather than being an absolute chore that you hate to do because it sucks so much out of you physically and mentally and so many hours out of your day. That becomes really empowering. You don't want to have a codependent relationship with the gym or with your workout or with the instrument that you practice or with your job. Nobody wants that because it just drags you down. It makes you negative. And so training in volume allows for you to do more work over the same amount of time by doing a little bit less of it and coaching you to be more efficient. Because your brain needs to be coached into things. It's not sustainable to sprint everything and then have to be completely gassed for huge sections of the week. I used to work like that. When I was restoring horns in Chicago, I would put in 45 hours a week in the shop, and then I had a 2-hour commute to and from work every day, and then on the weekends I would lay around and do nothing but play video games, and all of the playing goals that I had fell by the wayside, and all of the writing goals I had fell by the wayside, because all I was doing was working and working and working, and I had nothing fulfilling my life. And so training in volume, smaller amounts, over a smaller individual times over the same period allows you to have those extra times to make sure your cup gets filled. And that's what's really important, because in order to maintain things sustainably and in order to actively have this lifelong career or a lifelong project and living our lives to the fullest, like so many of us want to do, you have to be able to space things out that way. One of the most powerful things I've ever heard in my life was told me by my high school band director, Dave Wetmore. He always used to say, inch by inch, life's a cinch. You want to work in tiny little steps. And that's what will get you to the end. And so taking care of yourself is also a training in volume exercise, because everything is a step-by-step process. Inch by inch, life's a cinch. And I mean, hearing that phrase like every day for so much of my young life was really, really powerful to me. But so what that also means is like creating space in your day to unwind and relax and live and just be a human and do interesting things and try to live an interesting life and eat cool food, even if it's something you just make at home. Like, you don't have to go out to eat all the time to eat interesting food. You can like get a subscription service or try new recipes or just like whatever. The idea is like pursue that variety and enrich your living experience, and that will make your work easier, because if you have other things going on, your brain can decompress from it and it doesn't become soul-sucking because you've drained everything from it. And that's not to say that like if you create enough space in your life, you won't have codependent forces in it. You definitely will, because nothing is perfect. But then you have this space to try and improve upon those before you decide that they're just not for you. A couple of podcast episodes ago, I talked about non-negotiables, and one of the things I mentioned was I had a gig that I had acquired that was pretty good. I thought it was a great fit for me. I was doing even more fashion design stuff than I'm doing right now, and it got codependent really, really fast because they didn't want to maintain the hiring agreement that we had set out upon, and they had violated the terms of our contract. So I terminated it because it was sucking all of my time and energy out of my life. I keep track of all of the time I spend doing things that aren't relaxing. And then I keep track also of like things I'm trying to increase time on. So for example, earlier this summer, I decided, I really want to read a little more. And so I started logging my reading hours too. But in this case, I was like every area of my life had multiple hours a week or multiple hours a day, sucked away from it because of this job. And so it just wasn't sustainable. It wasn't sustainable for me to live the kind of life that I wanted to keep living, which is a very joyous, very colorful one that has so many interesting moving pieces a lot of the time. And so, I mean, yeah, a little extra money is great, but it wasn't helpful because it sucked so much away from everything else. It prevented me from continuing to train in volume. And this is taking on a really interesting new meaning to me, and I'm gaining new understanding of it as I am moving into this next season of my life. So over this summer, especially, I've really thrown my head into more yoga, which I did some of before, but not nearly this much. And now I'm doing it at a minimum probably 45 minutes every day. And honestly, it's closer to an hour split up over 2 sessions. And so my yoga in the morning is much more muscle activation and active based yoga, and my yoga in the evening is much more muscle relaxant, prep for bed, decompress, stretch my running muscles yoga. And it's really interesting because some of the poses that I used to really struggle with really don't feel very tough anymore. I used to struggle a lot with down dog, and now it's hands down one of the most comfortable positions I get in every morning through my yoga flow. And it's really interesting that it happens that way. But it didn't become comfortable until I started doing it every day for a little bit of time. Because, I mean, I do it in my regular yoga class that I go to on Wednesday nights through #GreenRoomCommunity. Go check those guys out on Instagram. But I mean, when you're not doing it super regularly, it's hard to insulate those nerve fibers. Your brain doesn't understand, oh, this is muscle activation. These are neurons we have to send electrical signals to in order to make sure this is lubricated, really, to make sure those joints want to move that way, to make sure those muscles want to move that way. And when you start doing things every day, even for just short periods of time, that becomes accessible. I probably only spend 3 minutes in downward dog every morning during my 10 to 15 minute muscle activation yoga flow that I do. But it's infinitely easier now than it was 2.5 weeks ago when I started. And that's really, really powerful. And then transitioning to something else, I'm training for a marathon in October. And one of the things I'm realizing and reading a lot about is that when doing that kind of training, I'm probably not getting all the way to 26 miles any day before race day, and that's fine. Because there are going to be weeks where I run 48 miles, but I'm not running 48 miles on 3 days with a load of rest days in between. It's tons of small runs and then one giant run and probably 2 days of rest, in addition to a lot of muscle activation exercises that I'm doing in the meantime. And that's the embrace of active recovery. And active recovery is also a training and volume exercise, because the more time you spend doing those muscle activation, low stress, like let's get a little blood and oxygen into the muscles and then let them decompress, is super, super helpful. And my flexibility has dramatically increased over the course of this year, too. I mean, I genetically have extraordinarily tight hips, and now I can do all kinds of wacky, like, back bends and stuff, even as early as, like, first thing when I wake up in the morning, which is when I do my yoga. It's like a get out of bed, make the bed, shut off my alarm, do yoga, go get coffee kind of thing. And so all of that together allows for just better sustainable activity going forward. And it all comes back to training in volume, because you don't want to push the absolute limit every day. You don't want to do so much of it that you're ready to get sick of it every day. If you hit the point where you start thinking to yourself, I'd rather never do this again, you've gone way too far. And so if you can create a good foundation through those same kinds of activities and build those habits, then when the going gets tough, you've made it worth it, because all of the time that you've spent going up to that, or at least a lot of the time you've spent going up to that, because it's never always going to be easy, but it gets easier when you have so many sustained, committed time that is positive. Really powerful influence, especially in the last couple of months for me, is a guy named Jeremy Wilson. He's the former associate principal trombone with the Vienna Philharmonic. He runs the Body, Mind, Spirit workshop with my mentor, Karen Kubides. And his hypothesis is, in as much as your brain remembers how to fire neurons to activate your muscles, your brain fires neurons in order to remember the feelings you had associated with them, which is a really powerful thing to understand. And what that means is, if you have a lot of experience with being angry or being afraid at something, when you have to do it, for example, if you are angry and afraid when you have to public speak, then when you go up to public speak, regardless of how you feel about it, your brain interprets all of those stimuli subconsciously, and you remember to be angry and afraid. And that's a really powerful hypothesis because the opposite is also true. If you train to be happy and joyous, even melancholy in the right kind of time frames, there are so many emotions you can readily access and associate with different experiences if you want to think about leveraging them, which you should, because curating the ambiance that you want to give off and being as authentic as possible is really genuine and really powerful, then you can make those things happen. If you want to if you want to get to a place that's healthier or make improvements on your nutrition and working out, you need to curate experiences for yourself where those are going to be positive. And if you do that in volume, so high frequency, moderate stress, or moderate work in order to pursue those, what you're going to find is over the long term, it's much easier to be actively happy about pursuing those changes because it's going to feel easy, because the emotional stimulus rather than just the physical or mental stimulus from those activities is joy, is happiness, is the kind of feelings you want to convey through them. And that's really, really powerful. Awesome. I think that's everything for today. There's a bit more and a bit different in the blog post. I suggest you go check that out. It spells out a little more things less conversationally, gives a few textual examples, but in the grand scheme of stuff, it's a really interesting post. I think you guys might really enjoy it. Thanks for listening today. I appreciate all of you. See you next time. We hope you've enjoyed this episode of The Musical Truck Artista, the podcast. You can find us online at mcgowanmusic.com or listen on your favorite podcast platform. You can also visit us at Andrew McGowan on YouTube or Music McGowan on Instagram.